So it's 6:30? What time is it?
Yeah, it's like 6:30 a.m. here. Welcome to the morning dialogues.
Yes, it's early morning, but we're full of great discussions in the morning, aren't we, Aaron?
We are. We're full of beans and other good things.
Coffee beans, tea, leaves, and tobacco. And you can see I can't roll by myself. I need a little helper there.
A special device.
So, Aaron, you were talking about Suadi.
Oh, Sukawadi.
Yes.
That's how I say it.
I only read it, so I don't know how to say
Yeah.
it, but I found out recently that he met a grisly end.
Oh, right.
Mm.
I don't know much about his grisly end, but a lot of interesting mystics met grisly ends. And that's like almost a testament to their mystical strength, that they could endure torture and kind of just tune out to this mystical transcendence, and even though they're being physically like mutilated or something. And I think it's one of the pre-Socratics went through something like that. I forget which one. But, yeah.
I think that I kind of want to get into his content, but I think that just fundamentally being a mystic in a time where Islam was so pervasive was also very brave.
Yeah, I think though, Islam back then is very different to our modern impression of radical Islam.
Mm.
And so, yeah, Sukawadi and people like that would have been actual Orthodox Muslims, and they could have not have been in that culture.
Well, what was interesting is
they
his
had
thing.
a mystical dimension,
Yes.
which transcended really the sectarian boundaries of Islam.
Well, he was doing his philosophy of light or enlightenment, and within the framework, the reason that he was persecuted and killed was because fundamentally it was not in line with the ruler at that time. Right? And so his philosophy, which was really quite beautiful, did lead him to a kind of a nasty end. But you had said yesterday that philosophy on its own and mysticism on its own are really half the game. So do you want to explain that again for us?
Yeah, well, he talks about it at the beginning of his... it's been a while since I've read it. It's I've got Henry Corbin's edition, which is like the French translation. And of course, Corbin was one of the major scholars of Sukhavati. But yeah, in the beginning of one of those books, he talks about how mysticism and philosophy need to go hand in hand. That basically you can get so far with mysticism and you can get so far with philosophy, but you can get further with both of them intertwined. And I guess in a sense, philosophy is kind of like a scaffolding that helps you build a higher mystical edifice. And without that support or that superstructure, you can't go as high or as deep.
I think it's still recording, though, so it's all good.
Yeah, it's just going to sleep. My computer.
We're not going to sleep, but the computer is.
My computer's been going to sleep and not waking up lately. It's classic Mercury retrograde fuckery. So.
In fact, let's just diverge for 1 second. Is it today? It is today in America, where Aaron has been telling me that Mars is squaring Saturn.
Mars and Saturn are conjunct and squaring the retrograde Mercury. And it's pretty much peaking right now. It's sort of, it's going to sort of, the Mars-Saturn aspect are going to be together for a few days or up to a week.
And it's not fun, basically.
It's challenging. It's a charitable way to put it.
When you were talking about philosophy and mysticism, I think very much you're a great example of that. because you have this really strong foundation in philosophy, obviously, and you're also, I would say, a mystic. And particularly when you talk about your experiences with ayahuasca and the information that you gleaned from that experience.
Yeah, I'm known mostly as a scholar, I suppose, but I do consider myself more fundamentally a mystic, and I guess it took me a while to own that. Like, because when I went to university in the first place, I was really going to deepen my understanding of mystical and esoteric traditions, and I was drawn to scholars who, like Henry Corbin and Mechia Eliade and Carl Jung to some degree as well, who were people who were scholars but also had this deeper esoteric or mystical level of insight, and you could tell that their works were grounded in something deeper. I felt inspired by those figures and I felt that was a good path for me to follow. But it wasn't a purely academic path, and the modern academy now is not really interested in mystics or esotericists trying to deepen their path using academic resources, So yeah, I went through the academy and came out the other side, and kind of feel that I'm more able to own or be more open about my mystical side or my personal quest rather than strictly objective academic work. And as I say, they're intertwined. They feed and inform each other. They really do. They're not separate affairs for me.
I think the challenge is that a mystical experience is by definition a very personal experience, right? And so mystical experiences, when people try to convey them, can many times be really fantastic, unbelievable and just hard for somebody else to wrap their arms around, particularly if they haven't had a mystical experience. And I could see that the academy that likes to measure everything and have everything nicely lined up, the mystical would be very intimidating for them.
Yeah. Academics like to think they have a corner on knowledge, and if you have mystical or esoteric knowledge that comes from personal experience, they don't like to know about that because it suggests, well, they think that people who have that knowledge have some kind of superiority over them, and that's really what it kind of boils down to.
Really, they think superior rather than insane.
Well, probably a bit of both. Well, they probably think insane, but they think that the mystical esotericist thinks they're superior, and so they're usually the ones that like to have the intellectual superiority complexes. They don't like it when other people do. That's
sad but true.
I'm speaking in jest, but it's a serious jest.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, I think that in my personal experience, some of my deepest understandings have come from what you would call a mystical experience. They give you a connection to the otherworldliness of reality. It gives you an acknowledgement that there is more than the material world, right?
Yeah.
And I think when you have that experience, you just have a much more open mind to look at knowledge with a different perspective.
Yeah, I mean, because philosophy and academic learning is great, but nothing really trumps personal experience, and especially when you're studying comparative religion and esotericism, you can do all that at a very intellectual level and have no ground or experience in the reality. And it's like, I think anyone would sort of go, why would you study something that in depth intellectually and then be divorced from any concrete experience of it? If you did that in any other discipline, if you studied medicine just intellectually and never practiced or never examined a patient, no one would no one would take you seriously.
Seriously, it's true.
You'd be like, okay, you know a lot, but you have no ability to actually be what you
say you are, exactly.
Yeah.
I think, the challenge comes in. I'm not sure. I'm honestly quite amazed, just through the people I meet, the level of mystical experience in the general population, right? There's a lot of people that have had some mystical or even strange or, synchronicity that allows them to open their mind to these ideas, but at the same time, there's a lot of people that haven't. And it's sort of like trying to explain to somebody, what is an orgasm like if you've never had one, right? You can kind of say it feels great, but until you've actually had an orgasm, you can't really speak the same language. And so if you're in an academic arena and people haven't had that experience, that might also lead to a little bit of the consternation about those experiences.
Yeah. I think that point about a lot more people have mystical or related experiences than you think. But that's the thing where it's lacking the philosophy or some kind of intellectual structure. So a lot of people, they don't know what to make of it. They're like, am I just insane? Often people will say that.
I know.
Often people will talk to me and say, does this sound insane to you? And they'll tell me stuff. And I always say, no, it's all right. You're not insane. But they don't have any structure or context to understand their experience. And that leaves them with this uncertainty about it. They're not sure if they should trust it or not.
Sure.
And so that's why, the philosophy, when it goes hand in hand with it, you have a context. You understand what is going on, or you got some language to. Because often people have experiences. Classically, people say these experiences are ineffable, and some of them are. But also having a language to talk about it, or knowing traditions where people have gone through these kinds of experiences and go, "Oh, that's what I experienced," or it's kind of more like this, and so maybe it's more like a kundalini than more like a some other kind of
like
experience.
A visionary experience.
Yeah,
for example.
yeah. This experience where you can just you realize that everything drops away, and you're just like you drop on the ocean, or drop in the ocean, and everything dissolves. And it's that's very different from, say, a kundalini experience where you're like, everything's kind of sort of shooting up to the vertical axis of your being, and it's more invigorating, and it's like a spiritual orgasm.
I was reading Gary Lockman, right, and his new book. And he was talking about Jung's experience with his mystical, or his relationship with his mystical experience. Yeah. And even Jung, that was so steeped in, the unconscious, had a really hard time coming to terms with what was happening with him. Like, he himself even thought that he was going insane. And he tried to surrender into the experience, and only when he was able to do that, to surrender, because he had a series of them. It wasn't like one, weird thing. He had a series of them, and when he got to the point where he could surrender into them, he was able to begin to make sense of them and really kind of obtain the messages that were coming through. Yeah. And I think that aspect of surrender, like me in particular as a Scorpio and a female and a nurturer, losing or giving away that control and surrendering has been a big lesson for me.
That's important, because we usually want to maintain control of our experience. A lot of spiritual practices seem to be about controlling your experience, and that's useful to some degree. If you meditate and you learn to focus, and you learn not to get distracted by the waves of thoughts or emotions that ebb and flow through your being, and so you attain some control, as it were. But it's kind of misleading to think of it as control, because really you're, like I said, you're learning to surrender. I think the most profound experiences are more about surrender than control.
Is it easy for you
to
surrender?
Depends. So sometimes a lot of the time it really is. There's some things. I think we all have things that we struggle with more and that are harder to surrender to. And I have fears. But I've had, there's a whole range of stuff that I've learned to surrender to much
Is there
easier.
fear? Is the reason that surrender is hard? Like in my case, I felt like I was losing Venus, right? That was my main experience, and that I was trying to hold on to Venus and not, dissolve into the great everything, right? And that struggle was not pleasant, and I think it came from a fear of losing me. And so in your cases of surrendering, or the challenge with surrendering, what would you say is what creates that challenge?
Yeah, I think it is fear. I think usually the biggest thing, at least for me, the biggest things are fear. And I mean, well, just to give you an example, was one of the times I took ayahuasca, and as you know, you purge or vomit when you're on ayahuasca, and so that's normal. That's normally, once you do that, that's when the experience really kind of comes alive or activates. I was outside and I was vomiting, and the times when I've done ayahuasca, you have a diet.
Yes.
Or you fast basically up to 3 days, at least 3 days to a week before. And so there's not much food in your stomach to begin with, and I was like out vomiting. Yes, and it's funny because stuff comes up that's like, well, this is nothing I've eaten. It's like it feels like a psychological purge, but it's also purging
material things and non-material
God
things.
knows what. So stuff comes up, and then I'm like, okay, there's nothing more coming. Like that's it. And then, but I just wanted to kind of like keep heaving, and it was just, I just wouldn't relent. And I was like, I wasn't struggling against it. Well, I guess I was. And
physically you do. Your body just doesn't like doing that.
Yeah, and then I got to a point, it just kept going, and I wouldn't stop. And I just kept trying to, rend stuff from my innards up. And I was just like, I'm like, this is just, it's like, it felt like it was ripping me in two. Yeah. Like I physically felt like if I kept going, it was going to rip my body like down the middle in two. And at some point, I just kept going, and at some point, I just went, "Fuck it, just rip me in two then," And I surrendered to it, and I gave up the fear that physically felt like I was going to rip apart. And so as soon as I just accepted that, it stopped, and it was good. And then the experience came on, and so it's fear. You cling on to your physical well-being, or your integrity. Your bodily integrity, or
your ego.
Yeah, your ego integrity. Yeah, all these things you just, because they're your norm. That's how these are the vehicles that you move through the world in, and you don't like to let them go very easily.
When I was a yoga teacher, we did several poses, right? And one of the poses was this fish pose, the supported fish pose, and it is really a pose in which you have to surrender. And I think that was the first time that I came across the concept of surrendering. Like, in your normal daily life, surrendering is not something that, like you said, it's not something that you do. It's kind of the opposite of that. You're fighting against the world, really.
Yeah, we're taught, I don't know, especially in the West, we're taught that free will and self-determination are, always positive things. And so we cultivate that, and we learn to be independent and have control of our lives, because we don't want to think that maybe there's aspects of reality that are out of our control. And one of the things that really, through my 20s and into my early 30s, my spiritual path was very much aligned with more like free will and personal sovereignty. And, and I was translating some of Gibbs's writings, and he talks about this, what he calls primordial trust. This experience he went through, because he nearly drowned as a child. Wow. And a couple of experiences it was about 3 experiences he had that instilled a fear of drowning in him, and he had a near death by drowning. And,
more than one's enough.
It was about 3 experiences that really crystallized it, and he had to he was at school, like he was a teenager, and they were learning to swim, and they would just throw you into the river, and you're supposed to like float. And he thought he was going to die.
Yeah.
And just kind of leapt in, and just as if he was going to die. And he surfaced, and he was alive, and he just sort of just changed him.
Yeah, yeah.
And later in life, he talked about how he was in Germany when the Nazis were kicking around, and so he left Germany for Spain, and he likened that to like the same sense of swimming free, like letting go and swimming free into a country where you don't know the language, giving up his fatherland and his mother tongue, and just swimming free in a spirit of trust. We don't know what's going to happen, but you trust it. And so, I was translating all this stuff and working on this paper that was exploring this idea, and it really, that was something that struck me really deep, and it really changed me, because I was, as I said, on this path of more about personal sovereignty and free will and spiritual control, or autonomy. And that really shifted and said, well, okay, I can do that, that's good. And it's actually good to have a good grounding in that before you let go. I think if you let go and absolute trust before you've got something solid to let go of, it's different.
Yeah.
But, so that, I don't know, the spirit of this primordial leap into the waters of primordial trust, I think, is, that really changed me. And I've undertaken a lot of things in life where if I fear it, I will just try and dissolve the fear and just open up to it in that spirit of trust. And,
I have to agree. I think that that primordial trust in the universe is probably one of the biggest lessons that I've learned. And before I learned that lesson, so this was really, I learned this lesson just before I came to Australia and I broke my neck, right?
Wow.
And before that, I didn't have any trust in the universe. Like, if you want to go to the most basic need of survival, I didn't trust that the universe would provide for my most basic needs. And so I lived in this constant state of anxiety. And I really came to an understanding that we have a very patriarchal society, and the patriarchal drives to be in action, and to be in control of your destiny and all of that. And so when you're in control of your destiny, as I was or thought I was, there was only so much I could do. And I undertook a course where I kind of got to see that there is also a feminine aspect to existence. And the feminine aspect is the one where you kind of sit back and you've sown the seeds, and you have to sit back and wait, right? And let the universe do its thing before the seeds sprout into plants that you can eat. Yeah. And I really took that on board, or I was able to integrate that really deeply. And since then, I have complete trust in the universe.
Yeah.
And it's made the stress level of just being alive. Like if, let's say, I run out of all the money and a big bill comes in, now I just know it's going to come.
Yeah.
I just know. I don't know how.
And that's the thing, I think, it's an important distinction is that kind of primordial trust it's about trusting in the uncertainty of existence. Because most people's approach to trust is about trying to find things that are certain and solid.
Sure.
And they're like, okay, this is solid, I can trust this.
Sure.
And that...
That's a fool's game.
And that's okay. That's what most people base trust on. And this is a different type of trust. It's like trusting in uncertainty and the unknown and what you can't rely on and what is not solid.
Yes, or what is not even known.
Yeah.
Right? The unknown, trusting that something's going to show up or whatever it might be. I'm using a very materialistic example, but just trusting that... But
that's a raw level where most people's immediate fears are coming. Like, if you get evicted from your house or you can't pay your bills, or then the raw material level of life is a great source of fear and anxiety and uncertainty. And so that's usually the best place to start trying to find that trust.
Yeah. And then what's interesting is that, I have And then you kind of come up a chakra, right, or up a level, and you get confronted with that same doubt. And I find the higher the chakra I go, the more unsettling it is. Like I've kind of mastered the material level, but there are still things that are unknown, maybe to do with the heart or to do with health, you know. And I've just recently had a really nasty go with the health thing. And there was a big issue of, am I ever going to get better? You know, am I ever going to be able to surmount that challenge?
Yeah, I think when it hits you on the level of your physical body, and that's the security or integrity of your physical body is challenged. And yeah, you don't know. Because yours was pretty uncertain. You didn't, like a lot of illnesses or something, it's like, okay, well,
it's a broken leg.
we know what it is. We know how to fix it. But some things are like just
more esoteric.
Yeah, that there's no clear answers or solutions. But I think, yeah, and it doesn't mean like trusting in uncertainty on an existential level means that life works perfectly. It means you know that even if you die, it's still going to be okay.
Yeah.
Like, you know, it's like if you let go of like your need for physical security, and then yeah, like you said, it steps up emotional security or whatnot, and so yeah, it's like layers.
It's an onion.
But you've got to start with the most immediate ones are your concrete physical life.
I think that's the thing that's kind of really interesting about life in general, is that life is just this series of initiations, and you know, you master something and you think, oh good, I've got life all figured out, and then you get sideswiped by another level of mastery to achieve, you know?
Yeah.
And I mean, is there a philosophical basis for that, or is that just something that do people talk about that from a philosophical perspective?
Probably. Nothing's coming to mind right now.
Yeah, no, it just is very much my own personal experience. Is that you know, and when I see my younger, say, female friends, I can see kind of where they're at, you know, and the bumping up against the head of that level of mastery. And it's kind of, you want to say, oh, sweetheart, it's okay, you'll get through it.
Yeah, it's just the beginning. Like, wait till the next one. Yeah.
Exactly. But, so going back to the mysticism for a minute, the use of entheogens, right, seems to be a very accessible way to have these experiences.
Yeah.
And there is a lot of warning about that kind of thing, and I kind of understand why. And we were talking yesterday about the use of them as sacraments, kind of, versus using them recreationally.
Yeah, well, I think it does make a difference. Because so much of it is about the intent. The intent behind why you take it. Even what Harold was saying yesterday about where you get the entheogen from. Like, you know, if someone just sells it to you, or what's their motive in giving it to you, or selling it to you, or, you know, or do you harvest it naturally, or do you make it yourself? You know, these things, even on that level, it has an effect. But certainly where you take it, the environment, and why you take it, like, make a huge difference. And
I love what you said about it's taken you 10 years to really incorporate the experience from the first sessions, you know?
Yeah, well, it's basically, I did take ayahuasca probably half a dozen times about 10 years ago, but none of them were as intense or as stratospheric as the first time. And I always felt that it gave me certain lessons and certain keys, and said, all right, now it's your turn to do the work. You've got to integrate these, integrate the lessons, apply the lessons, use the keys, and if you keep coming back, I'm not going to give you any more until you appreciate what you've been given.
Exactly.
And it's taken me, well, I feel I've integrated a lot of those lessons.
That's the word, integrate. It really is
Yeah.
integrating them, isn't it?
And I'm only now, 10 years later, that I feel I would perhaps
Benefit.
Meet the Marjorie again or something else.
I think, it's all knowledge, really. I mean, it's knowledge versus wisdom, isn't it? Integration is the key between knowing something intellectually and being able to use it and really take it on board.
Because a lot of people will take psychedelics or entheogens, and they'll get some deep revelation about, it's deeply relevant to their life and their being, and then they'll go away, and it's pretty profound for them. But then life, you just go back into your old patterns very easily, and you might look back on it and take some nourishment from it, but the existing patterns it's just too easy to fall back into them. So what are you really going to do?
Homeostasis.
Yeah, what are you really going to do to change or break those patterns or change your life in accordance with what's been revealed to you? And
I'll tell you what's a really interesting idea. Rick Strassman has a new book, and he, as you know, did DMT studies on hundreds of people, and he recorded the caliber of the experience and the information that came down.
Okay.
And he compared that to what he calls prophecy, which is basically mystical experiences that are recorded in the Bible.
Yeah.
And what he has come to believe is that there is really two qualities of experience on DMT, or in general. And one is a top-down experience where you truly are the beneficiary of some divine information. And the other one is more of an internal subconscious, he calls it bottom up, right? Where you're just dredging the corners of your mind for experience. And his feeling is that the mystical experiences as recounted in the Bible, because they were divinely inspired, had a much higher caliber of information that has in fact changed the world, right? But just recreational DMT use is more just regurgitating the information that's already in the head.
Right.
And, my kind of reaction to that is, well, let's see in 1,000 years if anybody's, DMT experiences do end up changing the world, but it's kind of an interesting thing to think about because there are occasions where it's completely profound and life-changing, and there's other times where it's just really cool, but doesn't render a major change in your life.
Yeah, and I think with the religious experiences, these were leading figures in their cultures who changed their culture. So,
but were they at the time?
Usually, yeah. Well, they became leading cultural figures through that. And I think that's the difference. I mean, you can have a profound mystical or entheogenic experience, but does that lead you to become a transformative cultural figure? Yes. And that's not everyone's fate.
No.
You can't just...
It's a really interesting combination of ego, will, and desire. You know what I mean? One of the things that I find is that you almost come to terms with what is a lot more. It's kind of, you understand, you have a greater understanding of maybe as Goethe explained, the totality of nature, that everything is interconnected and interlinked.
Yeah, and I think also with those old religious cultures, they did have their culture respected and revered that kind of top-down experience. And so their culture itself kind of had room to integrate that, where our culture now is materialistic and kind of sociopathic. And we don't really... And so the people that are, pulling in the gnosis are kind of on the periphery, and they're marginalized, and they're considered insane at best, or,
Well, look, I'm dealing with two people right now that have a very strong belief that they have I don't want to call it divine, but almost a, if it's a past life mission that synchronicities and mystical experiences have given them the great certainty that they're doing these things for a reason, and even though I've had my own mystical experience, when I hear it, it does sound so unbelievably impossible. But then I talk to other people and they're like, well, for instance, I talked to Lon, who is a ceremonial magician, and he's like, no, that's completely perfect and really how it should be. And our culture makes those ideas, because of the materialism, almost seem insane.
Yeah, I think the deepest level of those experiences, it is, like I said, it is perfectly true, but reconciling that with our culture, it's just they're two different worlds, the worlds apart. And there's also it's like these experiences are kind of outside of history. They're outside of time, and so when we try to put them back in time,
yes,
then there's dissonance, or you get two different realities, kind of, not converging,
but clashing.
Yeah.
I mean, it seems, I was talking yesterday about the Kali Yuga and how dense it is, and how possibly difficult it is to actually experience these, whether you want to call them soul communications even, or divine communications, because there's so much noise. I mean, just there's so much noise.
Well, I think that's why psychedelics and entheogens are really more popular now. Why don't I say popular, but,
there's a greater, greater discussion, greater adaptation.
So I think with the mystical, there's techniques and traditions for cultivating mystical experiences, but they're really subtle, and we don't. There's so much of the noise in our own beings and in our world that are just ready to drown that out, and so you got to really attune yourself to the subtlety of it. But psychedelics and entheogens, they just turn the volume up. They take what's there, but it's kind of quiet. They turn it up, so it's like it's loud and vivid and clear and unmistakable. But I think over time you realize that stuff's always there.
Yeah.
But we drown it out with our own internal crap and the external crap. And I think once you know it's there, once you've turned it up and had it really vivid, then you can start to see it or recognize it,
yes,
in its more subtle or quiet form, and start to give that more room in your being rather than everything else. And I think that's something not everyone does. They just go and try and hit more psychedelics to get to turn the volume up again. At least that's how I've come to understand it.
I totally agree. Like, for instance, after my entheogen experience, I was able to find that same place playing music. Okay?
Yeah.
And so I'd lose myself in the music and all of a sudden have this welling of.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's always there. That's the thing with these experiences, or these states of being are ever present. It's just how do we become aware of them? And we don't have a culture that supports or teaches us really that they're important. So these things they're kind of like just like a crowbar that kind of forces a door open. But sometimes the crowbar's not always, once the door's open.
Yeah, you don't need the crowbar anymore.
Sometimes it's not always the best. It's an important tool for opening the door, but then once you're through, or once you've removed those blocks, then the crowbar's probably not really the best tool.
As a Scorpio, one of the easiest doors for me to access that level of consciousness is sex. And I think that truly, with the right mindset, that sex is a great mechanism for reaching these states. And I see in society such a devolution of the sexual experience, right? Is that, that sex has become so cheap, so easy, so pornographic that, and I think maybe it was even done on purpose so that people would not be able to find that avenue because they're so busy looking over here.
Yeah. I mean, most of our culture is just so hedonistic. We just want like physical pleasure, and that's where it begins and ends.
Yes,
there's
exactly.
There's no other dimension to it.
And it's like such an amazing experience when you can bring in these other aspects, you know, and I go in the world and I talk to people and people say, oh, you know, they do Tantra. But when you actually start talking to them, they maybe are doing some, you know, some of the positions out of the Kama Sutra or something. You know what I mean? Just again, it's a very physical approach.
Yeah. So what is your understanding then of Tantra?
Well, I mean, okay, as far as I understand in terms of Tantra, there's Neo-Tantra, right? And then there's Tantra. And Tantra itself is a really big school of how to live your life, that one section of it includes, you know, sexual practices.
Well, it's the same way that yoga is not just a bunch of physical positions. Yoga is a whole philosophy, way of life. And it's a broad, rich, deep tradition. Yeah.
But Neo-Tantra, you know, and I have friends in the Neo-Tantra space, and luckily there's been really a kind of a bit of a revolution, but not too many years ago, Neo-Tantra boiled down as a way to take advantage of women and to have a few of these guru guys have sex with thousands of women under the guise of unlocking their root chakra, you know, and it was a travesty, you know, really a travesty. So, you know, that is what a lot of people in the modern culture are more aware of than, like, when I talk about my practices are very, I mean, there's obviously an external element that is going on, but what I do with that external element is I take it inside and I'm utilizing the energies and I'm sending them up my body, you know, and there's a lot of breathing and a lot of focus and I'm really working with that energy, and at the same time I'm trying to have an archetypal experience, you know, where there's a God form, you know. And so that's the process that I utilize, and the level of experience is quite profound.
Right. That's interesting. Yeah, because, I mean, it is... I mean, Tantra is all sorts of... It's a lot we can talk about. But that on that level, what you just mentioned, of you're really incarnating God and Goddess forms. You know, in your physical beings and interacting divinely, but also physically. That's how I see at least the sexual aspect of it. And to do that, you've got to raise your energy, you know, through the chakras. So you're not just engaging on a, say, base root chakra level, which is what most sex is, but you're, you know, at least you've got to open up. Well, you know. The axis of your being that the chakras exist on. You're opening up that whole axis.
Exactly.
And engaging with someone who's also doing that. And you're coming together. And it's kind of like it's almost like the two serpents of the caduceus, or the, what are those two channels called? I always forget the names.
The Ida and Pingala.
Yeah, it's like the two beings are those.
Yes.
Ida and Pingala are those two serpentine, caduceus-like, currents intertwining around a central axis. And so you kind of recreate that dynamic.
Yes.
Energetically.
And it's so real, though. Like, when you start doing the work, right, do you have an experience of actually this intermingling?
I haven't done it in a way that where I've experienced that so much with other people, but when I do open up that axis, and it kind of unfolds in the spiraling double serpent kind of way, just without, I don't do a strict visualization where it's like, okay, you visualize these starting here in this ventricle, and here, like,
you can't, you don't think you can, really.
I've tried, and it's okay, it can do that, but it's it's more.
You're going to lose the train, I think, if you get too.
It doesn't. If you get to the point where it's unfolding organically and you roll with it, you can't try and constrain it to a fixed visualization that someone taught someone once.
Exactly.
So that, if you can't get it unfolding organically, then those things can be useful to get it flowing.
Like the fire, yeah, exactly.
But yeah, so on that level, yeah. But Tantra is. I don't claim. Never claim to be a tantric anything, but I do. It does colour how I ultimately would approach these sort of things.
Well, I have to say that your story about the sloppy tantra. What did you say? Wet tantra.
It's wet and messy.
It was fascinating. So why don't we talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, well, because I'm a scholar, I like to go back and see what things were originally versus what people think they are now. And I was working a lot with, really the key material that really changed how I thought about it was David Gordon White's research. And he's a renowned scholar of Hindu Tantra, Hindu alchemy. He looked at the origin of the Hatha Yoga traditions and the siddhi traditions, the traditions for cultivating supernatural powers, and they're all kind of intermingling, like Tantra, alchemy, like the internal alchemy of the body, and all of that in medieval India, and they were very different. It's a very different world than what we think of Tantra now. And originally, it seemed to be, well, the feminine entities, kind of the Shakti forces, were originally these like yoginis or dakinis. They were like these semi-divine, semi-kind of elemental. They were like dangerous, bloodthirsty, like succubus-like creatures. And they wanted to. They fed on the vital fluids,
yes,
and sexual fluids of mortals.
And, so
fun. And so, but a certain type of person would be able to engage with these creatures,
like a master.
Yeah, and have this, instead of being just drained and left for dead, would be able to have this mutual exchange with them. Would offer up, his sexual fluids, and in exchange he would get like these supernatural powers. But it was dangerous. It was like you're literally engaging with something that can drain and kill you. And so like the fluids of the vital fluids of the body became sacraments, like offerings, and it was an exchange for supernatural powers, and it was like this dangerous dance. And so what David Gordon White shows is how this sort of very wet and messy tradition, and dangerous, became Brahmanized. So the Brahmins, because this is much more
pagan in a way.
Yeah, it was much more kind of. It wasn't an elite practice, and so the Brahmins got hold of it and kind of whitewashed it and made it more about the yantras, the visualizations, the mantras, and it was all this kind of like very safe stuff, and it was all safe and symbolic, and there was no real actual engagement with anything dangerous, and a lot of that still feeds through. I mean, to me, that kind of raw distinction is really what I see as the root of the left and right hand path.
Yes. I was going to say, because you can kind of, in that neo-tantra space, you can kind of see that playing out in a very human way in that neo-tantra space, where these guru are essentially taking the vital essence from all these women. Right?
Yeah.
And it's quite dangerous for them.
Yeah,
the women.
Yeah, they're like spiritual predators in a way. But the woman they're supposed to be teaching, they're not teaching them actually how to engage and survive that, which is what a real tantrika would be able to do.
Do you think, I mean, this is completely off the cuff, but do you think that those entities still exist today?
well, I haven't experienced them like that, but I think on some level, I would say so. Yeah, I'm not one to deny that sort of thing as mere mythology. But how it would
play out
in a experiential way, I'm not sure.
Just, there's these things called egregores, right? Which is like a magical term for almost non-manifest, use the word loosely, like beings, right? That are created out of our experiences and our thoughts and our obsessions, and with pornography, for example, at the state that it is, it could possibly be feeding an egregore of that nature as well, that perpetuates itself.
Yeah.
Just a
I think there's got to be a more subtle or imaginal kind of zone where that operates. And it might be exploiting us on a raw physical level, like through pornography and these things that exploit our compulsive and addictive kind of behaviors. And it's like, well, you can look at it on that level and go, well, is this something that is, draining me and using me? I think I'm using it, but no, it's the other way around. And so once you realize that, and you comport yourself differently to it, and it's like, well, what, you're not going to give unless there's a mutual exchange.
It's the playing field. Like, I think in life there is a lot of an unseen realm that, unless you draw a line in the sand and say, I don't agree to participate in this, and you're consciously aware of it. For instance, like, let's say you have a relationship, even with somebody that might be a little bit toxic, okay? There's a feeding of energy that can be of detriment to you, unless you become conscious of it and say, no, I'm going to break that connection. Yeah. And the same thing could possibly happen on a
No, I think that's, I think it's something that definitely plays out on an ordinary level, but yeah, like, I think it's got the layers when you start peeling it back. But yeah, I think I do think there's a danger with not in a sort of bloodthirsty Darkini like danger, but there's a danger with using sexuality as a spiritual path, that you think you're in control of it when really it's just your compulsions and your desires are controlling you, and so you make this philosophical or spiritual superstructure around it and think you're doing Tantra or something spiritual, where you're really just feeding your desires and your base addictions, and you're not using it as a liberating force.
And that so really applies to everything, to entheogens, to even, physical practices, that anything that I think, anytime that you get a charge around something, or you're have a compulsion, right, then any of these things can have a hold over you.
Yeah, and I think, and I think about this a lot with, we were talking the other day about the Greek magical papyri.
Yes.
There's all these, ancient spells, and they're like, how to attract a lover, or how to, catch a thief, or how to, like, conquer your enemy, and they're all very worldly aims. Yes. And the same, I think about it in the sense, like, well, there's a level where you're just going about attaining ordinary desires. Yes. But you're using a spiritual or
mechanism to do it.
Or magical mechanism. And for me, that's not really what magic is about.
There really is only one. I mean, from the highest possible perspective, there's only really one drive, and that is whether you want to call it to be with God or to become God, right? And those very spiritual people that are able to have that one focus and not get distracted by the material. I mean, I'm not saying that they have an easy road, but that in many ways is, if you're going to use magic or any of these practices, it really should be to align.
Well, that's the thing. I always come back to the idea that because magic is often very much about desire,
Mm.
and so often you use it to attain desires of different kinds, but there's not so much refinement of desire. Desire is something with different layers too, and it has to be distilled and refined, and there's less attention to that, and everyone's obsessed with magic or occultism or whatever, and there's not as much attention to, well, there's lots of attention to meeting desires in magical ways, but not
what
defining
is the desire? Yeah.
what desire really is.
And is this the apotheosis thing?
Yeah, well, I've always been interested in traditions of apotheosis, and
Well, define apotheosis.
what face value is, it's deification or becoming God, and that sounds hugely egotistical if you take it
at the face value. Yeah.
But it's more like, ultimately, it's really the idea that we are innately divine, and we're returning to our divine natures and becoming what we really are. And that's a process. You've got to liberate yourself from what you think you are and what you're conditioned to be, you're learning to engage the divine kind of core of your being, which is liberated and free and primordially awakened, and at the same time, you're still mixed in a mortal body and mortal world, and so it's you've got multiple realities intersecting. But
have you engaged in the practice?
Yeah, well, I've had experiences with divinities and of divinities, not in any way that people might imagine, if I just by saying that. But certainly on entheogens, I've had the experience of, because it's a little similar to what I think in like some sort of voodoo traditions where they're possessed by spirits.
Sure.
Like they set up a ritual context, and spirits will come along and kind of ride someone, or possess them, and this person's like, oh, that person's possessed by this deity now, or this spirit, and they know the spirit by its behaviors.
Yeah.
And the person's just totally kind of given up to it, and so that's sort of a form of spirit possession in a way. Not in a demonic sense, that's possible too,
Possible,
but
yeah.
like in a positive spirits. There's also what they call two-headed possession, where you're still conscious that you're you, but there's this other spirit or divinity acting through you, and so that's the kind of experience I've had, and it's, in my understanding of it, was that it wasn't like some spirit just came along and just took over and I was still conscious of it. It was more like when I let go of my inhibitions and my hang-ups and all the things that kind of limit my energy to a kind of like, my awkward kind of ordinary self, they were kind of like cast off, and what was able to come out and be free was this sort of devilishly playful kind of trickster god. It was Loki in the Nordic tradition, and it was, it's like, it was a surprise, but also made perfect sense. It's like, wow, I didn't. Yeah, it was.
Sounds like what happens to me on tequila.
Yeah, that's the thing. Like, once you do that, then you can, like you said with music, once you've done that, other contexts you find that it's there and it can come out.
How do we get Loki out?
Well, sort of alcohol or karaoke. It's there.
Yeah, no, I know, but I totally understand, and that's what's really interesting about spirits, like tequila, for example. I don't know. There's a friend of mine who's done a whole discourse on alcohol and its relationship to spirits, right? And we were talking about the alchemy of plants and how the underlying spirit of plants is alcohol, but it's I mean, maybe for another morning we can get into that, because it's a fascinating...
The alchemical process and stuff, yeah. But
so when Loki's there, are you watching? Are you observing?
No, it is me. Okay. I am... It's more like what I'm like when I cast off all my reservations and able to be purely free.
Yeah.
And
Why is it so hard for us to do?
Yeah.
Like, I mean, Chance is a great example. He's got so much music inside of him, and he's so talented, yet he is constrained.
I think we fear that freedom,
Mm.
to be honest. Like, it's kind of, and that's one thing, this is a lesson I haven't fully integrated from those experiences, is that you can be like that all the time.
Mm.
It's there in you.
Mm.
But what stops you? And it's like you're scared. I fear being like that all the time. Because to be like that all the time, it's...
Destructive?
No, it's wild, and it's more like you're disrupting everyone around you.
In a good way.
Yeah, but also people have learnt that you are... They've come to know who you are in this kind of socially conditioned or socialized
acceptable way.
And then, but that goes all out the window.
Yeah.
And
I'm going to get you some leather pants. I can see Loki. I've got a vision of Loki from that Viking show, right?
Yeah.
It's a different Loki, but it's hot. We need to get you some leather pants. But I get, maybe if everybody let their Lokis out, right, it would be a much better world. Because the neuroses and the fears are the things that really, I think, stop.
Yeah. These are what lock ourselves into a more mortal state of being. And, not everyone has an inner Loki. Everyone's got a...
But an inner something. Maybe an inner... Who's the good one that chops off the heads of men? Kali.
Yeah, no.
There you go.
I mean,
that could be a bit exciting.
I do believe we've all got an inner divinity of some kind. And I think part of the process is finding out what yours is. And sometimes we have illusions as to what that is. We think we have an inner Kali, and we might have an inner...
Bugs Bunny. But I know what you mean. Like, if you go and talk about people's past life regressions, like everybody was Akhenaten or something. You know what I mean? Yeah. And so it's really, truly getting in tune with what, like, for me, hanging out with Lon, Milo Duquette, is really interesting because in this work, or in this devotional work, right, as a path to apotheosis through devotion, he's very clear on where his devotion lies, right?
Yeah.
And I sit there and I'm like, well, which God speaks to me? Or which, I
had that question for years, and I had certain divinities that I thought were the ones. I tried to work with them, and moderate success, but it wasn't really coming through in the main line, I think we have to separate ourselves. It's like choosing a totem animal. Well, you don't choose one, it chooses you. So if you choose one, you're like, oh, I'm a lion or an eagle, and it's like...
Mine was a turtle.
Right. No, I've known of someone where that's been the case too. And so mine was a swan.
That's
like,
right.
I never would have chosen that.
Yeah, exactly. I can see it though.
But that's the thing. It makes when you get, when you realize it, it's like, oh, of course, it makes perfect sense, and it's like it's natural, and other people can go, I can see that.
It, yeah.
But you got to remove. There's totems of the ego.
Yeah.
Or there's apotheosis of the ego.
Yeah.
You got that's a big trap. You got to be very careful.
And again, it's tuning into that subtle, like the ability to be able to actually hear and have the ego not get in the way and say, "Nah, I'm a lion instead of a turtle."
Yeah, and also it's interesting when you get to know the divinity that is aligned with you. And in our culture, we have comparative mythology.
And value judgments, too,
so we can sort of see the connections it makes. And another thing that came through years later, without any entheogens or anything being involved, was I had a realization that the chthonic side of Hermes or Mercury had a very strong overlap with this Loki figure. So it's funny because I'd always, my work, what I do as a scholar is I study the Hermeticism and the Hermetic tradition and alchemy, and the god of that tradition is Mercury or Hermes. And I always knew about that. Like, okay, it's cool. You're cool. But never felt a real connection to it. It was only when I had this experience during a Mercury retrograde and all this stuff happened, all these synchronicities just kind of flooded it. and over a couple of weeks, and it showed me that there was that chthonic side, the Hermes that goes to the underworld and guides the souls of the dead, and it's the more he's a thief and a trickster, and his ways are indirect. He's not he's not the herald of the Olympic gods. He's more this darker side of Hermes, and that makes perfect sense. That's more like the Loki, or
that's the vibe.
And that's when I went. That's when I accepted Hermes or Mercury as like, okay, that's another form of the god that is aligned with me. And also you're looking at also years before I even had the experience of Loki, even 10 years before that, I was really deeply involved studying the runes and the Nordic tradition. So I felt there was something there, but I was exploring the god Odin because he's the god of the runes, and there's nothing quite connecting again. I was trying, but it wasn't connecting, and he's a god that is connected with Mercury, but it was not this wasn't the darker side of him. But in the Norse tradition, Loki is kind of, arguably, but you can sort of see him as the dark side of Odin, because they were blood brothers.
Yes,
and Loki was part of the Aesir or the the sky gods, but he was also against them.
Yes,
He brought on all the he gave birth to the creatures that destroy the world, but he also helped the gods that establish the cosmic order, and so he was on both sides of that divine drama, and that made a lot of sense to me. So a lot of when you find it, a lot of things fall into place, and a lot of stuff makes sense, and the mythology becomes personalized in a way, or have a personal significance,
and a use probably.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so then the myths become ways of teaching you about your own nature, and they become kind of tools.
Instructive.
Yeah.
I think, one of the things that, growing up in a Christian tradition, you've got a God, and the idea that there are so many more to look at, and that they do have, like the Egyptian gods have, constructive and destructive sides, and so maybe I just need to go into the pantheon and have a look at see if I can find one. But I maybe that's not my path, though. That's not. No,
but I think it's sometimes it's so obvious you don't see it.
Yeah. And will you pick one for me then?
That's a good question.
Well, I'll tell you what. We'll make breakfast and we'll take it up tomorrow. You can think about it.
All right. Sounds good.
Well, this is lovely. Thank you so much. I hope you enjoy it, guys. Until tomorrow. I think it's still going.
Yeah, it's just.
I think it was great.
All right.